Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are talking about the Billy Meier case. In case you weren't aware, I'm sure you're aware if you've been listening to the show at all. I've been doing most all my programs upon Revolution Radio, and it's good to be back to quiet, controlled, relaxed blog talk radio. Probably where I belong in many ways. It's also good to finally have a little bit of time where I can just kind of devote myself to the Meier material. I've been extremely busy music-wise, extremely busy work-wise, and it's good just to have a half a day here where I can talk about the Meier material. We've got a few days here on this Labor Day weekend, and I will share Meier information with you during this time. If you're new to the show, or even if you've heard it many times, often I talk a little bit about Billy just generally at the beginning of the show. Edward Meier is a very interesting man. He's 81 years old. He is an incredibly prolific author. He has written over 50 books. I'm looking at 4 of them right now, and the other one is up kind of on my bookshelf. I'm looking at The Might of Thoughts, The Way to Live, The Psyche, and the New Talmud of Emmanuel that one of the listeners sent me. And this book is huge. It's absolutely humongous. So we're going to read a little bit from that today. Billy Meier has written over 50 books. In my opinion, they are the greatest source of wisdom on the planet. Edward Albert Meier lives in a place called Hinterschmidreuti. Hinter in the German means behind. And Schmidreuti is the tiny village, the tiny mountain village that Billy lives behind. It's about 40 minutes or so east of Zurich in the pine forests and the snow-capped mountains in Switzerland. And Billy, when he was 5 years old, growing up in an area called Bulak, Switzerland, which is even farther north, he started to have his first telepathic messages from his mentor, a man named Svath. Svath was a human being from a world, a very Earth-like world, that rotated around a star very much like ours. And the people on Svath's planet originally, unfortunately, were called the Pleiadians, but they're not really from our Pleiades. They are some 80 light years beyond our Pleiades in a different space-time configuration. They've been in a very highly evolved state, and they have not had war. I do not believe they have had war for 20,000 years. And they have citizens that have reached a very, very high level of evolution. One very, very high state of evolution is called the King of Wisdom, or the Ishwish. And Billy is the only Ishwish on Earth, the only Ishwish, Earth human, let's say. Svath would land his silvery pear-shaped craft nearby where Billy was awaiting, and he would bring Billy up into the ship, as it would say, as if by ghostly hands. Young Edward Albert Meier, 5 years old, we brought into the ship, and the ship would go up into Earth orbit. And yes, the Earth is a sphere. It's a beautiful blue sphere. And young Edward Albert Meier got to see this awe-inspiring vision. And Spoth started to tell Billy about his previous lives, the fact that he had been Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad in his previous lives. In this life, Spoth was about ready to prepare him. At least Spoth would work with him for the first 11 years of his life to prepare him for writing all this material that I'm talking about. And these 5 books that I've read or am reading and I am studying and continually studying are part of what's called the teaching of the Spirit. And this is the information that's going to cause a great change in the earth, that is causing a great change on the earth as people learn the value of this information. And one of the big things we're going to learn about today is fighting against negative thoughts, because unfortunately Earth human beings are generally being controlled by negative thoughts. And part of that is because we're programmed when we're very young. If you listen to the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, he explains that between about 1 to 7 years old, we are in what's called, I think it's called the theta state, where we're literally absorbing information continually. It goes right, it's the subconscious absorbing all of this information. And we absorb a lot of negative thoughts, which become habitual. And literally you can drive yourself insane through negative thinking. So let's hear it, and I'll read a little section from the Might of Thoughts that talks about negative repeating thoughts. It says, "But the reason that psychically disturbed human beings of all kinds only see black in black, and therefore negatively, is that their perceptual ability is very limited, whereby the world of thoughts also inevitably falls prey to a limitation, and is only able to move in a narrow framework which allows the limited and negative perceptions." So what happens is we rotate these negative thoughts over and over and over again, and it becomes a great source of misery for people, and it triggers them emotionally. So I'm going to teach you today one of the things that you can do to start to fight back, to gain control of your thoughts again. Now, Billy, in the Might of Thoughts book, explains the importance of confidence and optimism and being relaxed and being cheerful and being enthusiastic. So I kind of came up with this little system. And when I feel the negative thoughts coming on, and a lot of times when you wake up in the morning, look inward and notice how you feel. And if you can feel some negativity, you probably have had a negative thought, whether it's conscious or not is another story. But the feelings grow out of the thoughts. So if you even if it was subconscious, a negative feeling will surface. And you could be harboring some negative thought down there. It could be a little bit of a sense of dread about going to work in the morning, or maybe a little bit of sense of dread because you don't have a job right now, or something that's you may not even be completely aware of, but it will manifest as this negative thought. So what you can do, if you'd like, one of the things that I've done over the past 8 or 9 months now that I've had some success with, is to tell yourself, I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful, I'm enthusiastic. And this comes straight from the book. I'm the master of my own destiny. I'm the forger of my own fortune. I create my own good luck. I clarify my thoughts to make them more valuable and purposeful. I do not allow my thoughts to drift. I steer my thoughts like a captain steers his ship. My good thoughts produce good feelings. My good feelings produce good habits, which bring good circumstances into my life. It is the nature of thoughts that by their might alone, every conceivable thing can be brought to fruition. The universal creation law says that thoughts enlivened by might and power will have an effect. And that effect is directly related to the might and power of the thoughts. So if you're rotating negative thoughts with might and power, you're going to reap negative effects in your life. So stop doing that. Instead, you can bring in the positive. It's a positive inclusion. So if you're thinking negative thoughts and you bring in something positive like I'm confident. Now, you may not be all that confident right at the moment. You may not even be hardly confident at all, but just the effect of saying that, I am confident, will bring a positive inclusion into your negative thoughts and start the process of making it equalized, balanced. You can even start out with a positive thought and bring in a negative inclusion to make it positive, neutral, equalized, balanced. You see, where you can become a sartan or out of control of the good human nature by negative thoughts or by positive thoughts. So we're not talking about totally positive thoughts, although I emphasize the positive thoughts because most people have thousands of negative thoughts every day because of their subconscious programming. And this is horrifically destructive. So your default behavior needs to be changed. And you have to repeat and repeat daily, weekly, monthly, over and over and over again. You make it a habit of telling yourself, I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful, I'm enthusiastic, I'm the master of my own destiny, the forger of my own fortune, I create my own good luck, I persevere, I persist, I endure, I am calm, I am satisfied, I am in harmony. It is the nature of thoughts that by their might alone, every conceivable thing can be brought to fruition. So it's the might of your thoughts that brings circumstances about. It's a law of creation. The thoughts enlivened by might and power will have an effect. So if you're thinking powerful thoughts, make sure they're neutral, positive. If they're negative, the thoughts are thereby forced into a cycle in which the same thoughts and themes of thoughts appear over and over again, whereby a rotation of the thoughts is practically called forth. This is like you've built a neural pathway in your mind of negative thinking. You need to reroute that. You need to recircuit that. I've finally been successful in ridding my neural pathways of the repeating negative thoughts. And once such a rotations of thoughts begin to operate, the human being who is controlled by it can barely free himself from these rotating thoughts. If anymore, if he or she does not, his or her world of thoughts, bring in a positive thought again. So, because what happens is when you're having negative thoughts, your perception becomes narrower and narrower and narrower, and you focus on the negative thoughts. Have you ever seen somebody do that? They can't stop talking about some negative circumstance. They obsess over it. Because the more negative your thoughts are, the narrow your perception is. If your thoughts are neutral positive, you have a broader field of perception. So, with negative repeating thoughts, you can have your capacity for perception impaired. So, and you can even come into a delusional state. That's how people commit crimes. Let me give you an example, and this is what's said in the book later. It says, and this is in contrast to when confused ideas control thoughts and cause them to go from one extreme to another, which triggers emotions, which can lead to manslaughter and murder. As a matter of fact, the border between normality and being delusional is blurred when these negative thoughts come in. And genius and madness can merge. And you can fall prey to insanity, to a psychical disorder or a psychical illness. From page 26 of The Might of Thoughts, whoever has negative thoughts will soon allow himself to be controlled by them. Consequently, the human being is shaken and knocked about by the circumstances of his or her life as long as he or she believes herself to be a helpless creative creation of external conditions and influences, which are not. You are the master of your own destiny. You are the forger of your own fortune. Might of Thoughts, page 28. He/she becomes not only the actual master of his or her thoughts, rather he or she actually becomes the Lord and master of himself and his or her entire life. Now, let me talk about that. This is very challenging. I can see finally the past 6 months where various circumstances in my life where I've been able to apply the Might of Thoughts to, where positive circumstances resulted. It's pretty nice to be able to sit back and say that. It's a big boost to your confidence. You should be confident. Absolutely. Every human being, no matter how many failures you've had prior to this, you should be very confident. Every human being who practices self-cognition and takes up self-examination, you will allow your self-control to grow. So remember I was talking about looking inward towards those feelings. How do I feel? Ask yourself. A person did me wrong and I struck back. How do I feel about striking back? I feel bad. When I struck back against that person that did me wrong, I harmed myself. I struck at them and I harmed myself. It had just the opposite effect that I wanted. So don't strike out against others. Think about that. Your thoughts produce effects in direct proportion to their might, to the might of those thoughts. The changes to the circumstances of life and so forth are in direct proportion to the altered condition of your thoughts, the neutral positive. So the more powerful your thoughts, the more dramatic are the changes to your life circumstances. So if our thoughts have a lack of power and might, you may have very little to no change in your circumstances in life. So if you're struggling, you got to keep struggling, man, because eventually you're going to have might and power with your thoughts. And if your thoughts are neutral positive, you'll bring neutral positive circumstances in. One of the greatest things is, if nothing else, is being able to produce calm inside you at will on a consistent basis. That's a skill that you will have. You'll be able to change the circumstances of your life by changing your internal circumstances. When you learn the skill of bringing calmness to yourself. A circumstance is the existing conditions or state of affairs surrounding your life. Examples of condition include your state of being, a state of health, a social position. Well, hopefully we'll have a little time to come back to that. That was what I wanted to cover from the might of thoughts. We're going to talk about the might of thoughts today, which we already have. We're going to talk about the New World Order a little bit. I'm going to talk about the Talmud of Emmanuel. And then I'm going to talk about love and reincarnation. Somehow I'm going to work those both into 15 minutes, maybe. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do all of that. But I thought I would talk about, and I hate to switch topics because the might of thoughts is so important. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of the negative things that are going on in the world. Because humans are being controlled. We have an imprisonment of our consciousness that's taking place. There's a vast amount of knowledge that is being hidden from people. And that's one of the reasons I love to bring you this show, is because I can bring you this knowledge. This knowledge is so helpful, the Meyer information. Whether it's the might of thoughts, or the way to live, or the psyche, or the goblet of truth, or the talent of Emmanuel, or the contact reports, to bring you this knowledge. But there's a tiny amount of people at the top of the pyramid that are hiding knowledge from the masses. They don't want us to know all these things. There's fantastic technology that exists outside of public knowledge. There are great mysteries from the ancient world. One, the pyramids of Giza, Easter Island, Baalbek, stones that weigh over 1,000 tons. There was a group within ancient society that had fantastic knowledge. I believe that group was extraterrestrial, some of them. Extraterrestrial human beings. We've been lied to about many things. We've been lied to about our founding fathers, one of which was Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin had a home in London at 36 Craven Street, where bodies were found buried. Benjamin Franklin was one of the founding fathers of the United States. Those bodies most of them were children. Benjamin Franklin was involved in human sacrifice and blood drinking. Our founding fathers were not what many people believe that they are. Let me move on. I want to talk more generally about the New World Order. This conspiracy wants a world government which will dictate major policy to every country. They want a world central bank which will dictate global finance. They want a world currency. There will be no money, just entries in the computer. I often wonder about that. I use my credit card like crazy. This group wants a world army. World army to impose the will of the world government. They want a microchip population, and that microchip will control you. Probably with that microchip, they'll be able to kill you if they want. The microchip is not a good thing. They're going to sell it as convenient, and it will be convenient. Humans are basically blind in terms of what they can perceive. There's a great blindness today among the masses. There's a hidden knowledge. The world is a very, very different place than most people believe. And some of this comes from the ancient religions. But the elites have a plan for the future. They have what's called an Orwellian state that they want to bring in. An Orwellian is an adjective describing a situation, a societal condition that a guy named George Orwell identified as being destructive to the welfare of a free and open society. Also, the Orwellian state is an attitude, a brutal policy of draconian control by propaganda. We're seeing this now. The deep state controls most of the media. We see propaganda all the time. Misinformation, denial of truth, manipulation of the past. I talked about this group wanting a microchip population. It's coming. Everyone, if they have their way, everyone is going to have an RFID chip. All money will be related to the chips. So the elite, if they want to, in this future time, if they make it to the point that they're heading for, if they don't like you, if they don't like what you think, if they don't like what you say, they'll take all the money out of your account. They want us to be their slaves. The elite want to have total control. The one world government will be run by a banking industry. What does Billy say about microchipping? Well, this has been discussed in Fecal Bulletin number 2. And with what's called the DSP monitoring system. It's a global satellite system. America has taken towards the first step towards what Billy calls a horrifying futuristic vision of total control over every human on Earth. And then what Billy says here is through the Fecal Bulletin number 2, this vision signifies that terrestrials will soon be unable to take a single step without being observed and controlled by an all-inclusive monitoring system. It's one of the things I skipped over, I think, in my notes here. Is the deep space platform is up there. We talk about the space station up there, but they've got satellites all over the place. They can observe everything. Now, one more thing that we're seeing, and I'm just going to spend a few more moments on the New World Order. The New World Order had a plan that was spelled out a few years ago, and General Wesley Clark spilled the beans. And we're supposed to go to war with Iraq, Libya, Syria, eventually China, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Somalia, Sudan. The New World Order is related to the neocons here in the United States as well. When Wesley Clark met with one of his military friends, an officer in the Pentagon, the officer said that we were going to war with Iraq. That was way back in the time of the Iraq War. They made the decision to go to war, and we have a good military, so we take down governments. And there were 7 countries that were supposed to be taken over in 5 years. Well, they're behind their schedule, the New World Order is. And this New World Order goes all the way back to a guy named Albert Pike, and probably before. And Albert Pike had a vision of World War III all the way back in the 1800s. Another interesting story on Albert Pike and how the Illuminati is planning to use Islam to destroy the West. I think this was planned decades ago, maybe even over 100 years. Might be somehow related to the plans of the Giza intelligences I often say that heavy metal music is a kind of reflection of the city itself. The sound of machines and the screaming of the singer, it's much like the sounds of humanity imprisoned within the cities. So I think that heavy metal music is an outlet for the urban suffering that people are experiencing within the city. And this is all part of the plan of this new world order. The teaching of the Spirit enlightens people about the incredible splendor of nature, which is the visible expression of the love of creation. So let's take a break here from the New World Order for a while. And I want to read a little bit from the Talmud of Emmanuel. Maybe this will start to be a habit. The Talmud of Emmanuel is written by Judas Iscariot, which is not Judas Iscariot. So let's start there. Boy, it's hard to just start out in this book. This is a very, very dense book. Very, if you haven't got it yet, there's a lot here. I'll just say that. The emergence of the scroll records of Judas, Ischkerioth. The scroll records that were produced with regard to Emmanuel's teaching and life arose, on the other hand, through the notes constantly made by Judas Iscariot, which is a different Judas, not the traitor, in part to the parts of the teaching that were dictated by Emmanuel, which Judas wrote down in the form of the scroll. However, the whole thing only corresponded to a small part of that which Emmanuel taught. So this is gigantic, and it's only a small aspect. Because Judas noticed and wrote more and more about the work of Emmanuel than about the actual teaching of the prophets, which Emmanuel brought, taught, and advocated, and which were very extensive. No records about that were made by Judas Iscariot, because everything was too extensive and too detailed for him to have been able to accomplish the work of a complete record of his teaching. So a complete record of the teaching of Emmanuel, I guess, was not possible because his teaching was so vast that no one could possibly write it all down, which is very, very interesting. Remember, Emmanuel was a predecessor personality of Edward Albert Meyer, and you couldn't take notes. Try to get the information out of in 50 books in your notes, which would be kind of hard. So, one moment here. It says, this was also clear to Emmanuel, who knew that his brought forth teaching of the prophets, that is, the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of life, would be extensively written down and spread in the new time. By the way, the new time started in 1844, which actually also happened, and which held in extensive works like the Omphal and Morado, the OM, and the Goblet of Truth. The two works mentioned correspond in an absolutely unfalsified manner and word for word to the actual teaching of the prophets as they were created by the universal prophet, Nokodamian. Well, let me talk just a little bit about that. Some of the predecessor personalities of Edward Albert Meyer include Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, Muhammad, but they also include an individual named Nokodamian. Nokodamian incarnated on other worlds. He was a prophet. He's known by the Plairon as their teacher. And Sfoth, who was one of Billy's mentors, was also connected to Billy through his former lifetime as Nocodamian. So let me continue here. Incorporated therein are also certain parts from the present time, which I myself, Billy Edward Albert Meyer Beam, have written as the last proclaimer from the Nocodamian line, which was recognizable as such. So there's a chart that's been created by a fellow who has a website called creationaltruth.org, I think it is. And he has a great diagram which shows the line of Nocodamian as we know it. We don't know all the people. Aristotle, Socrates, Galileo, Mendelssohn, Mozart, Rasputin, just to name a few. But there were also people off-world, human beings on other worlds, that are part of that line. You see, the planet you die on is the planet you reincarnate on. So if I die on the Earth, I'll reincarnate on the Earth. If I get in a ship and fly to another world and die on that world, I'll reincarnate on that world. Earth is not the only planet with human beings on it. There are millions of planets with human beings on them in the Milky Way galaxy. The teaching of the prophets, that is, the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the life, does not only encompass the values that are contained, for example, in the OM and the Goblet of Truth, because the whole thing is much more extensive and put together in large parts in the so-called spiritual teaching, which contains a number of other textbooks, as well as a teaching course that goes over many years. So I guess people that are members of the FIGU, which I'm not, have a special teaching thing that they go through as well. The traditional mention of the name Judas Iscariot, or Judas Iscariot, in the New Testament, as well as by Isa Rashid with regard to Emmanuel's disciple, is just as long as the translation Judas Iscariot. According to the Plairon Labored Expert, with regard to the Hebrew written language, as well as according to the explanations of Erhad Athrasada level, the correct name of Emmanuel's disciple, and this would be great, someone can correct me, I cannot pronounce this correctly yet, Judas Iscariot, Emmanuel's traitor, however, bore the name Judas Harriet, perhaps. So there's two Judases. One was the traitor, and one was the one who wrote down the scroll, the Talmud of Emmanuel. One of them, I think, was the son of a Pharisee, who I think was probably the traitor. And they've got some interesting pictures in the book here. Of Judas. So Judas Harriet and his father, the Pharisee Simon Iscariot, belonged to a sect that rendered resistance against the Romans, that is, against the Roman occupying forces. And at the same time, both operated secretly in this. And since Judas Iscariot and Emmanuel had, Judas Iscariot, which is not the traitor. I think it's the Judas Iscariot who is the traitor. So the traitor against Emmanuel was in a resistance rendering group that were resisting the Roman occupation. So Judas Iscariot, I'll just pronounce it that way for now. They were out to silence Emmanuel and to make the other Judas look like the traitor and the liar. And even, if you remember, the Arahat Athrasata level, I guess, brought information to Billy about this. So Emmanuel just taught love, peace, freedom, and harmony. He taught about the power of the human spirit. He talked about the creation. He talked about reincarnation. He had nothing to do. He wasn't talking about political things. He wasn't talking about the Roman occupation. So there's the Judas, Iscariot, was the good Judas. The bad Judas was Judas, Iscariot. So if you can remember it, the bad Judas, the end of his name, it sounds like riot. Maybe that's a way to remember it. There's also a Gospel of Judas, which was actually related to the bad Judas, Judas Iscariot. Sounds like a riot. Sorry about the long silence. Very interesting book here. Just going to cover this for a couple more minutes. It's actually getting into a very interesting section of the Talmud of Emmanuel. It's called The God Believers, Jews and Judah. A brief history about Judah and the Jews. The designation Jew, Hebrew, Yehudai, in relation to the belief of this people is fundamentally incorrect, because a human being who is a Jew is, since time immemorial, here a member of the tribe and the inhabitants of the southern kingdom of Judah. In Jewish tradition, he is the progenitor of the most important Israelite tribe of the same name. They settled in the south of the land in the area around Hebron and around Jerusalem. Okay, this is very interesting here. The Jews are, in accordance with their God Yahweh, God believers or Yahweh believers. Hence, they are fundamentally actually Yahwehists. Now, this can also sometimes pronounced Jehovah. Jehovah is an extraterrestrial human, a member of the Giza intelligences. Jerusalem was conquered by David around 1000 BC. Emmanuel and Solomon's death, 926 B. There arose a division of the kingdom. Thus there arose. So there came about a southern kingdom and a northern kingdom of Jerusalem. And eventually there came about the Babylonian captivity. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in our next program. I wanted to introduce the whole God believers thing and how that started. This is part of religion that we have today. The whole idea of the God believers. Okay. New World Order we talked about. We talked a little bit about the Talmud of Emmanuel. We got about 15 minutes left in the show. I'm going to talk a little bit about reincarnation and a little bit about love. And love is the highest principle in all creation. And through it, everything exists in absolute logic. Every tiny plant and every tiny animal fulfills its purpose in love. Love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. If you study nature, you'll start to see the absolute logic of plants, particularly trees are so important. And when I think of trees, I think about the creation. I incorrectly said trees really don't have a sex. Well, technically, they are both male and female. Sometimes there are male. There are sexes in trees, I was told. But generally speaking, trees are pretty gender neutral. The creation is neither male nor female. And what's beautiful about trees is they're silent. And they only move in relation to the wind. They're so constant. And they bring shade, and they become homes for animals. And the forests of the earth moderate the weather. Through shade in the summer, they keep it a little cooler, so they don't allow the heat to run away and create the giant storms. Also, the wind blowing across the tops of the trees create the turbulence, which forms the clouds, and the clouds eventually form the rain. So there's a wonderful logic to creation. You see how the interrelation of the forest and the atmosphere and the sunlight and the shade and the animals. This is all by the design of creation. So if you chop down trees, you do a tremendous amount of damage that you don't even realize. And as a tremendous population of the earth expands, we destroy more and more trees. We upset the delicate balance that exists on the beautiful green and beautiful blue earth. You know, there's a law of growth and progress, and a law of adaptation, which we can see through the trees, through the plants, but also through our own thinking. You know, a tree, which is beautiful. Think about a tree. Trees are never out of self-control. As far as I know, trees never get angry. They're beautiful examples of neutrality, which is the way of nature. The incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. Creation radiates love through the beauty of nature. If you see beautiful snow-capped mountains and green hillsides with beautiful trees, you're seeing the incredible splendor of nature. In fact, nature radiates love. Love is the highest principle of creation. Effective love is the most important kind of love that you can have. If you can experience healthy love, true love, it will produce a very healthy feeling inside you. If you can express a love towards all nature, all people, all plants, you will have a very healthy internal feeling within inside you. Billy had a beautiful passage. When his experience as a young boy, when he looked up at a starry night, he said, I saw the light which the stars emitted, but I realized that there was an invisible light called the love of creation. And creation radiates love. And this love radiates outward if you're sensitive to it. If you're not sensitive to it, the world's going to feel like a place without love. And as we destroy nature, the world will again feel more and more like a place without love. I urge everyone to plant trees in their yard, to grow plants in their yard. Well, folks, I think I am going to call it a little bit short today. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We'll be back tomorrow if all goes according to plan. Have a great evening.